And our special guest today is Ken Houston, who is the state president of the NAACP. Ken, thank you, sir, very much for being with me.
Thank you for having me, John.
You understand, because I believe later this week, your organization is going to be right in the middle of an effort to make sure that African Americans vote in this November election. Black votes matter. Tell me a little bit about what you're up to and why it's so important.
Well, John, what we're doing is we're launching in a very aggressive initiative throughout the Commonwealth to empower African Americans to understand the importance of the vote. The initiative is called Wake Up Black Vote. As many of us grapple with some of the situations throughout the nation, the Pennsylvania State NAACP is aggressively looking to ensure and assure that African Americans not just register to vote, actually vote. We've seen a very serious downtrend of African American voting. After President Obama's term ended, his second term, you saw a very, very downward spiral of the African American vote.
Why do you think that happened?
I think what happened, John, is that the enthusiasm kind of went down. And because of that lack of enthusiasm, you saw a lot of people just decide that they did not need to vote. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to re-energize and really teach, John, about the importance of the vote. You would be very surprised at, particularly in the African American community, some that have this myth or this misconception that that their vote doesn't matter, and that's absolutely a fallacy.
Is it fair to say that, and is this your belief, that you can do all the protesting in the streets that you want, but it's very hard to affect public policy unless you elect people at all levels of government who agree with your point of view?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that is one of the things that we are aggressively dealing with in the era of protesting and marches, and they have their place. And we certainly want people to exercise their constitutional right? But after the protesting stops, after the marches stop, John, then what? So the NAACP, from a national perspective, has a very aggressive campaign on legislation and getting bills on the table. As you see with Washington now, they're grappling with that very issue. We're actually working with our state Senate here in Pennsylvania on that very issue. So it's very, very important, John, that we vote. It's very important.
As you know, in a number of states, there certainly have been charges of voter suppression.
Yes.
Do we see voter suppression in Pennsylvania, and what is the nature if we do?
Well, we do see voter suppression in Pennsylvania, and one of the issues that we're confronting right now in our Commonwealth is the closing of certain polling places. And of course, we know in the era of COVID-19, we don't want folks, forming in mass numbers, and of course, wear your mask and all the protective mechanisms with dealing with COVID. But also what we're seeing, John, is that people that were doing mail-in ballots was having a lot of challenges. And when we talk about voter suppression, there's an intentional and then there's an unintentional. So oftentimes we have to look at both of those perspectives, right? Because it could be unintentional, but it still has an impact of voter suppression.
Well, what you say about polling places is really important because people are used to voting in their neighborhoods. And my understanding is that what happened in the primary in Pennsylvania is not allowed in the fall. The legislation allowed a one-time consolidation of polling districts.
Yes.
But hopefully that's not going to be needed in the fall, because I can understand how people get confused. If they don't know where to vote, they might not vote.
And John, you make an excellent point on that. As a matter of fact, we are grappling as the Pennsylvania State NAACP. I've charged my chairs, particularly dealing with the health and looking at from the political perspective as to what this may look like in the fall, because as you know, John, they are saying that may see a very aggressive second wave of COVID-19. And we're seeing an uptick in the issues relevant to COVID-19 as more things open up. So our hope is that we don't have to deal with this issue, and that we do have the opportunity to go physically and vote.
Finally, Ken, do you think that the 2020 election, particularly given the recent events, is likely to inspire more African Americans to vote this time than they did in 2016?
Well, that's certainly our hope, John, but that's where my organization, the NAACP, we bear responsibility in ensuring and assuring that that happens. We have to get very, very aggressive in ensuring that our African American community, from my political action chair, we're going to see an uptick in voting because, of course, when general elections come, particularly with this administration, we may see a very serious uptick in voting.
Well, Ken Houston, the state president of the NAACP, thank you, sir, very much for taking time and talking to me today. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure.
We're with Tim Stevens, who is the chairman, CEO, president, head of BPAP, the Black Political Empowerment Project. Tim, thank you, sir, very much for being with me. Always appreciate it.
Absolutely. We go back a long time, though.
We sure do, more than a couple decades at least. So let me ask you, Tim,
Yes.
the Black Political Empowerment Project, does it really begin with voting by African Americans?
Absolutely. A lot of the issues that we face as African Americans and as people in general in this nation and locally begin with the power of the vote. How many Supreme Court decisions have been decided by one vote, 5-4? Some of those decisions are pivotal in terms of how they affect the lives of Americans on a daily basis. The presidential election of 2000 was decided by 537 votes in Florida, which is amazing.
Yeah.
The Electoral College decision of this nation to have Donald J. Trump as president was decided by 941 votes in the Electoral College, 741 votes in the Electoral College. That's a minuscule number. And when people say that their vote doesn't count, they're not looking at history.
So let me ask you about this, because the vote in the African American community in presidential elections was on an upward trend and reached a record level in 2012. But in 2016, for the first time in 20 years, there was a decline in African American vote. Why do you think that happened? And is it likely to happen again in 2020?
I want to correct something. With 77,741 votes is the number by which President Trump won the Electoral College, and only about 44,000 in Pennsylvania. So that voting thing is huge. In terms of the Black vote and the difference in recent years, I'm not going to give you a definitive answer because I don't know. It must have been something that part of it was the social media that put out negative information, put out information that may have dampened the Black vote. I think with this election, with so much that we've seen of certainly the power of the presidency, be it negative or positive, in recent months and recent years, I think I'm expecting the Black vote to be pivotal, not only in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and Pennsylvania, but for the nation. Our future is truly at stake. When we decide uh, the next few years of who's, for instance, at the presidential level particularly, who's going to decide those Supreme Court nominees in the future? Who's going to decide those federal appointments? The policies of this nation, so often in recent years, they've been done by executive fiat. We have to be in the polling place to decide who the mayor is, who the county exec is, who the governor is, who our legislators are. So when we go to them and say we want them to support certain positions, certain policies and procedures, we speak from authority versus from just morality of what we want a politician to do and to be like. Morality is good, but I think it's more important that we also have the finality of the vote to decide who is in office and who is not in office.
You have been working on this effort to increase African American voter participation, frankly, Tim, for decades. For as long as I've known you, you've been really focused on this.
That's correct.
Is there a secret to this? Is there some magic? I mean, how are you going to make this happen?
The magic is in persistency and consistency. We cannot get work done by doing something for a month or two, or even a few years. You have to stay at it, and you have to keep finding new partners who believe in what you're doing, believe in the cause. I think what has happened across this country in recent years, the several months of the COVID-19, which has made it real clear of the ongoing disparities between Black people and white people in this country. The June 25th killing of George Floyd, for white people who didn't understand it before, I think millions of white people across this country understand it now. The issue of how Black people are treated differently by some white officers, not only locally, but across the nation. I think this death was so horrific, so graphic, so horrible, that it woke up America. And because of the COVID, a lot of people were staying home at levels that they normally are not, and they couldn't escape the conversations, both of the COVID-19 and its impact on Black people, and the impact of May 25th with the death of George Floyd. So they all have come together. And I think if our community and the African American community does not vote in this election, when will they?
Very, very well stated, as always. You know, I guess sometimes if it's a generational thing, because we hear how important African American women are, and particularly older women, to the voting process. But of course, you know, you need everybody to participate. Is there some special effort being made that you would recommend that aims at younger voters?
Well, first of all, I think the older voters have a history in this country because older voters were alive when Black people could not vote in certain states of this nation. Certain people over a certain age right now, listening to this or watching this viewing, were alive when Black people could not vote in certain states of this nation. So older people have more of a connection to the importance of that moment in the 65 Voting Rights Act. Yes. And also, it goes back to when the current administration came in and disrupted the 65 Voting Rights Act and gutted it. It goes back to the power of the vote and who's in office and who is not. With regard to young people, I think what happened on the 25th of May and the thousands of people, thousands in Pittsburgh, thousands across America, and even across the world, most of those marches are led by young people, teenagers, young adults. And I think the young adult population has come to life. And I cannot imagine that with this election being so pivotal in the future of America, in the future of African Americans, that younger people will not also come out at significant numbers on November 3rd.
You know, that's an interesting way to put it, because I think a lot of folks would say, you can do all the protesting you want.
Correct.
But you can't change policies unless you elect people to public office. Is that a fair way to say it?
It's not a fair way, it's a correct way. The protests are important. I believe in them. I've been in many across the years and the decades, and will be in more, I'm sure. That brings attention, but the vote is what brings people to, now the vote literally brings them to the polling place, but it also brings who is going to be in office and who's going to be out of office to decide on the policies and procedures that you believe in. So if you really believe in those policy changes, if you really believe in the nation has to create policies that exhibit equality, that has to be with your presence and those in your circle being in the polling place. Not only on November 3rd, but as the Black Political Empowerment says, voting each and every election.
Well, Tim Stevens, it's always a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you, sir, very much for your insight on this. I appreciate that very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm John Delano, political editor at KDK TV, and we're privileged to be with State Representative Ed Gainey from the 24th Legislative District, a resident of the Lincoln-Leamington area. Representative Gainey, thank you, sir, very much for joining me today. Appreciate that.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you about the importance of African-American voting. I've seen sort of I guess it's sort of the tagline, Black votes matter. Black voting matters. Do you believe that's true?
Absolutely, I do. I believe it matters, and I believe this year you'll see that. I think that a lot of people look at 2016, and I see that African Americans didn't come out to vote. I'm looking for the future. I think right now we understand what's at stake. We understand that there's a whole lot of different issues right now that are here that we have to vote for if we're going to get the things that we need to help America grow. And so I'm looking for a big turnout from the African American community, because right now, in the season that we're in, the COVID-19, the police violence, everything that's going on, this is what is going to help African Americans come out and cast a vote. You know, we know that, and we'll show it at the polls come November.
So is it your view, Representative, that, protests are very important and have their role, but in the end, it's voting that counts?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the protest is good because it keeps the issue alive. Martin Luther King used it as a strategy back during the civil rights. So we know that protesting works, and we know that it works, and we know that it also creates momentum. And that's the momentum that will drive African Americans to the poll come November. We want new leadership in DC. We want new leadership. I'm sorry, that's my phone. We want new leadership in DC, and we're going to vote that way. I think if you look at the primary in my district alone, the turnout was high in African American communities. So if I look at the 12th to the 13th in Wilkinsburg, I can see the increase in numbers of people that came out to the polls. So we look forward to November. We're going to come out big.
Do you have any reason why African American turnout, after going up for 20 years, declined in the last presidential election? Do you have any hunches why that happened?
There could be a lot of variations to why it happened. I think the key now was to focus on what we have to do to ensure that the African American community comes out in November. And I think that we're primed for it. And you see a lot of different people talking about it. It's all on social media about us needing to get out the vote. I don't think there's no question that we'll vote strong come November.
You know, you've heard this said, that really the bulwark in the African American community when it comes to voting are really African American women.
Yes.
I don't know if you think that's true as well, but that's certainly what we hear. I
believe it's true.
How do you get young people to get engaged?
Well, I think young people are going to get engaged this year just because they're tired of what's going on. It's a beautiful, to me, I wasn't born in, so I didn't get to see civil rights. I got to study it, but I didn't get to see it. But today, to see these young people taken to the street the way they're taken to the street, to fight against police violence, to fight for other civil liberties, it's amazing and it's beautiful. And so I think that the youth are ready to go to the polls and vote. I think just like back then, they will show up at the polls this year because they understand what's going on and they understand that this is significant. And they understand in order to get the type of to get the type of change that we need, we have to show up at the polls. There's no question about it. I believe this year the protest turns into voting.
Do you think they're registered?
I think a lot of them are registered, and I know a lot of people are registering the youth right now. So I think a lot of people are getting registered. I believe that everybody's gearing up for this November election. I have no doubt about that.
Well, this sounds like it could be a record year for African American participation.
I believe it'll match that of Obama.
Really?
I think that, yeah, I do. I believe if it don't get there, it'll be mighty close. We see what's happening. We see what's going on. We don't want to go backwards. We want to go forward. We want a society that works for everybody. And we understand that in order to get there, we got to go vote. We got to turn out. It's more than just protesting. The protest must turn into a voting action that talks about how we change the condition of America. And I believe they will show up, particularly our youth, because they're tired of it, and they're demonstrating right now.
Well, State Representative Ed Gainey, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, sir, very much for your time and for your insight into all of this.
John, thank you, and have a great evening.
I want to know who we're running from.
I do not know.